Hello, in this broadcast, the news from the television company Ostankino. This evening, the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, extended by another 48 hours the deadline set in his decree for the voluntary relinquishing of weapons by individuals involved in the armed resistance in Chechnya. This is stated in an address of the President to the residents of Chechnya. The President noted that the weapons are actively in use in countering the federal state powers and restoring constitutional lawfulness and order. The best recourse in this situation, Boris Yeltsin emphasized, would be to cease fire and sit at the dialogue tables without any preliminary conditions. In the event of a personal agreement on the part of Jahar Dudayev to head the Chechnya delegation at the talks, the President of Russia will send an authorized delegation of a high level. The residents of the Chechnya Republic, it says further in the address, to date were deprived of an opportunity to truly and freely express their will, and as well to freely and in accordance with the laws of the Russian Federation form state organs and define the fate of their republic. The wiser decision today would be to set dates for elections in Chechnya. In an attempt to reduce to a minimum the use of forceful methods through which, unfortunately, there may be casualties among the population, the deadline to lay down arms voluntarily and cease resisting federal forces of law and order is extended by 48 hours, beginning 0000 hours the 16th of December. It's imperative that heavy weapons should become still and then relinquished in the time frame allowed. In these hours, critical for the fate of the Chechnya people, I rely, Boris Yeltsin emphasized, on the understanding of all Russian citizens regarding these positions. The press service of the government of Russia today reported that the command of the group of units of internal forces of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Ministry of Defense by end of the day is completing the blockade of the regions of Chechnya most saturated by unlawful militarized groups. From the north, west and east, Russian combat detachments emerged onto command elevations within immediate proximity of Grozny. From here, there's a good view of stronghold points of the armed formations within the city. The operation on seizing the command heights was a success despite the fierce resistance by the unlawful armed groups. The quantity in men and equipment of these groups significantly has increased in the last 2 days. Currently, the formation is being completed of reinforced combat groups and fortifying them with combat technology, including tanks, artillery, and missile installations. The groups by the morning of the 16th will be reinforced further by well-trained personnel. We just received a report from our special correspondent, Alexander Korovkin. During the course of the day, the forces continued to hold the occupied parameters. Because of weather, flights of combat helicopters and planes were not conducted. On the eve, near the village Pervomayskaya, sighted from helicopters and fired at were combat carrier vehicles of the gunmen, concentrating for the attack on the deployed army units here. 6 combat vehicles have been annihilated. 2 cargo vehicles were hit. 20 military service personnel from the Internal Affairs forces remain hostage, and they were seized by gunmen in Kosayurt. After lengthy talks, it was possible to return 38 of the 58 people. 6 officers are currently evidently in Grozny. The location of 14 soldiers is still unknown. The wave of refugees from Grozny is increasing. The day before yesterday, 1,500 people arrived in Kosayurt. Learning this, Dudayev dispatched a group of gunmen to the village who threw children and women out of the windows. Barbaric tactics are employed against Russian women to ensure their loyalty to official Grozny. All their children are taken into the mountains and kept there as hostages. This morning, news arrived which cast doubt on the possibility of the continuation of talks in Vladikavkaz on the Chechnya problem. At midday, however, hope did appear. Our special correspondent Dmitry Motrich reports. Today, at the last moment, it was possible to preserve a chance to restore peace in the Chechnya Republic. A phone call from Grozny, which the Russian delegation waited for all night, came only in the morning when the task commission of the government of Russia was ready to depart from Vladikavkaz. The Minister of Justice of Chechnya, Usman Imayev, said over the phone that at a special session of the government of Chechnya, the question is being discussed about continuing talks. Despite unverified reports in many sources of mass media, there was no official response from Chechnya yet, and at these very moments the Russian delegation is still expecting a call from Grozny and again confirms Russia's intention to resolve the problem peacefully. Now, everything depends only on the Chechen side. As we were told in the Temporary Information Center in the government of Russia today in the Ministry of Emergency Situations, another meeting of the operational team was held on humanitarian issues. It was noted that the delivery of humanitarian cargo by Il-76 planes to Mozdok is going on schedule, and already almost 146 tons of food and medication have been delivered. Today, by regular flights, another 89 tons were delivered. Perfecting the system of social security for Russians was examined today by members of government with leaders of women's, youth and sports associations at a meeting of the Conciliatory Commission in Moscow. The concern of participants was fired by the deteriorating social services in the Chechen Republic. All the ministries have received a request to immediately prepare to restore the entire life-sustaining network, and mostly within the social bloc, that is, hospitals, clinics, schools. Today, the Ministry of Emergency Situations is sending humanitarian cargo, and they have approached, and at the first opportunity, they will all be unwrapped and distributed to the population. And so the citizens of the Russian Federation who are residing in the Republic of Chechnya will be able to avail themselves of all those rights which are guaranteed by the Constitution of the Russian Federation and the laws. The Vice Premier also announced that the decree of the President of Russia is ready, pursuant to which, towards social aid to regions of Russia, 10% of the funds will be allocated, realized next year from privatizing state property. This is around 120 billion rubles. Not to demoralize units of the Russian army on the territory of the Chechnya Republic by using unverified data on the situation around the conflict. This exhortation was issued to the journalists by the head of the president's administration, Sergei Filatov, in an interview to ITAR-TASS. He categorically refuted reports of several sources of mass media that the Confederation of the Peoples of the Caucasus at their Congress declared mobilization of volunteers to aid Jahar Dadaev. According to Sergei Filatov, the president of the Confederation, Musal Shanibov, did not organize this action. The head of the administration of the President of Russia is convinced that, speaking on behalf of the Confederation, are people interested in escalating the conflict and not in stabilizing the situation in Chechnya. Today, the President of Ingushetia, Ruslan Alshev, in Moscow held a press conference where at the center of attention was also the Chechen conflict. Ruslan Alshev is the president of the closest republic to Chechnya, Ingushetia, expressed extreme concern over developments in the conflict, which unfortunately didn't bypass his republic. Today, possibly for the first time, he candidly expressed his opinion about the actions of federal authorities regarding regularizing the situation there. In his opinion, not all peaceful options were pursued, but the main reason for yet another tragedy in the Caucasus, Alshev feels, is that the leadership of Russia simply lacked political will. And although the situation is ignited to an extreme, the president of Ingushetia sees the solution not in further increasing military presence around the Chechen capital, but in the quest for peaceful methods. All that is possible, Ingushetia is ready to do, and I, as the President, am ready to do, to stop the bloodshed and to facilitate talks and to resolve everything normally and in a civilized way and not by force and weapons. Today, on the initiative of the Russian Orthodox Church in St. Daniel's Monastery in Moscow, a meeting was held between the Patriarch of Moscow and all Russia, Alexei II, with the ecclesiastical head of the Chechen Republic, Muhammad Hussein Aslanbek. The spiritual leaders were unanimous in the fact that bloodshed in Chechnya should be immediately stopped. They most decisively rejected also the very thought about the conflict around Chechnya possibly growing into a Christian-Muslim resistance. The spiritual leaders admonished their flocks to pray for the return of peace. The events in Chechnya are carefully watched by all NATO member countries. This was stated at a press conference in Brussels by the General Secretary of NATO, Willy Klaus. But mostly, this is the internal problem of Russia, said Klaus. He expressed hope that this problem can be resolved without bloodshed and with the full respect for human rights. Each day to mineral waters, Pitigorsk and Mozdok, more than 700 Russians who have left Chechnya arrive. They squeeze through military cordons and patrols and get there any way they can, because almost almost all transportation means and routes on the territory of Chechnya are not usable. According to the Federal Immigration Service of Russia, the wave of Russian immigrants could acquire a landslide proportion if combat is not stopped. In that case, fleeing Chechnya in the near future will be from 500 to 55,000 people. Overall, the Russian population today there is 100,000 people. After the first armed clashes of the Chechnya opposition with the state forces, Astrakhan was literally flooded with a wave of refugees from Chechnya. Basically, these are Russian families who are simply shocked by treatment they received by Chechnya authorities. Lately, it was just impossible to live there. I'm afraid to show my face. I'm so afraid. We were so intimidated. A year and a half ago, Dudayev said, in the event of an invasion by Russian forces, all the local Russian-speaking population will be taken hostage. These people have come into the multinational Astrakhan area probably because it's very nearby and for centuries has a reputation to be the calmest city in the south of Russia. Today, in the Astrakhan district, 6,000 refugees have been established and the majority of them are from Chechnya. Each day, our immigration services process 50 people. Each family receives subsidies. Currently, the district is ready for 1,500 people more. They still hope to return to their native lands. Even blinded by suffering and grief, they don't believe ambitious leaders are capable to impede the striving of simple Russians toward peace and accord, no matter what religion they belong to, no matter their ethnic origin, because all of them are, first of all, citizens of a sole nation. Tatiana Mikhailovna, how many Russians have left Chechnya during the time of combat? If we take the combat period, that's around 6,000 people. But overall, from Chechnya, over the last 2 years, we have taken in 200,000 Russians. What measures is the Federal Immigration Service planning to undertake in connection with the new wave of immigration? Reception points have been set up, passage points at the border with Chechnya, in order for us to receive, process, feed, house, and keep, at least for half a year, in these temporary reception centers. The government has already allotted 6 billion rubles for this emergency situation, only for the refugees. The basic burden is taken on for now by the Stavropol Rim area. There, we have 2 reception points for 3,500 people each, and apart from that, today also news arrived that there's preparations underway for Chechnya and mineral waters, and gradually our centers are being set up in Astrakhan, Saratov, and Volgograd. What can these people count on who have found themselves outside their homes? First of all, they can count on having at least a temporary roof over their heads. Now, this is the fundamental thing, because there is great humanitarian aid flowing in, not only food, but clothing as well. Today in Moscow, the first meeting of the Consultative Council of the Subjects of the Russian Federation on international and domestic political issues was held. Speaking there, Andrei Kozyrev again emphasized that it's time to end with separatism and time to build a normal state. We are all Russian citizens. We all have equal rights. And that is, first of all, to live in safety. And the country must ensure these rights. If necessary, implementing force in regional conflicts against armed gangs, and with the priority of demanding disarmament and later resolving all questions through political means. In any case, these are the last days when we will be involved in questions of armed separatism. It's time to be involved in other issues. The Consultative Commission, established by presidential decree, is intended to be a connecting organ between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and subjects of the Federation to consider their interests in forming and conducting external policy. Just now, ITRTASS reported that at the press conference in Grozny, which was held prior to the President of Russia sending an address to the residents of Chechnya, they announced the statement of Jahar Dudayev, which says that he wishes to continue dialogues with Moscow. In Dudayev's statement, adherence is reasserted to principles of resolving the conflict issues exclusively in peaceful ways. However, the government of Chechnya, it says in the statement, feels it's indispensable to terminate the combat combat by withdrawing Russian forces from the Chechnya Republic and begin high-level talks without preliminary conditions. The deputies of the Duma, in discussing the agenda, did not support the suggestion to dedicate the entire session today to discussion on the situation in Chechnya. Although the development of the conflict still is quite alarming for the Duma, several times during the session today the deputies returned to the Duma. There were many suggestions. They even wanted altogether to fly out to the conflict zone and the women in the Duma to begin a demonstration and as well to invite the president and the premier to the auditorium. But these suggestions were not supported by the majority, and realistically they only managed to listen to the information from the chairman of the Security Committee, Viktor Ilyukhin. According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, as of the 8th of December 1994, on the territory of Chechnya, more than 1,200 criminals found refuge and hid who were wanted in all regions of Russia. I can say, again citing the same data from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, that today in Chechnya, and basically in Grozny and in its environs, there is a concentration and presence of more than 13,000 armed individuals who are ready to defend Grozny. According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Federal Service of Counterintelligence, today the Dudayev regime has an arsenal of more than 51,000 firearms. The day in the Duma today was quite productive. The deputies worked with a beat, literally and figuratively speaking. A small conflict erupted when the parliamentarians were examining the Prosecutor General's request to lay criminal charges against Vladimir Zhirinovsky, and although in certain points of his book, The Last Throw to the South, the acting Prosecutor General Alexei Lushenko found a corpus delicti, the deputies decided not to indict the leader of the LDPR. But when Ivan Rybkin allowed the Russia's Choice deputy to speak, the constant opponent of the Liberal Democratic Party, the fragile balance of powers suddenly shattered. The Speaker of the Duma is asking the members to sit. After this, the parliamentarians did return to legislative work and adopted a document in which the government guarantees to safely preserve the money which Russians deposited in savings banks before the 20th of June 1991. After the third revote, the deputies endorsed a draft law which provides for compulsory illumination on state television and radio of proceedings in organs of state power. And one more law was discussed today by the parliamentarians on days of combat glory. Now there are 11 such days, marking days when the army and the fleet held victories, playing a decisive role in the history of the country. As a result of such active work, the agenda was very soon exhausted. The deputies ended their session in the middle of the day. On the backdrop of events in Chechnya, the agenda of today's meeting of the government was amazingly peaceful. The general scheme of population distribution on the territory of Russia, providing housing for the Chernobyl liquidators, draft laws on natural resources and foreign economic activity. The general population scheme on its own is a scientifically based concept in adopting decisions when mass waves of immigrants form suddenly, induced or forced by wars or repressions, or natural movement of those who are seeking more affluent regions. Simultaneously, it is the basis for the urban strategy policy, which will help to avoid incorrect decisions, such, for example, as erecting the city's Lautich on radioactive land. The general scheme was endorsed by the government and is recommended for use at all levels of power. The painful topic is providing housing for those who helped liquidate the Chernobyl disaster was also not challenged, especially since 28,000 people are still alive, and the average age of those continuing to die because of radiation is 40. However, the embarrassment and doubt lies in the fact that the program will have to be executed from what remains and other sources of financing. Only 40% of the expenditures is taken on by the government, the rest is handed over to the local level, and at the local level, without any shame, the Chernobyl victims are not a concern. Summarizing the discussion, Alexis Kovets instructed that this problem must be resolved completely within 3 years. Yesterday, the Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Kiev ended another round of talks on the Black Sea Fleet, and today they met in Moscow. The journalists who waited for them were told that they categorically disagreed with comments which assert that dialogues on the fleet have no results yet. There is significant progress. I can tell you, for example, that we have agreed on a posture in a principal plan of an overall nature as the possible interaction between the Russian Federation and Ukraine regarding the fleets of our countries in the future as an object of regularization to provide stability in the area of the Black Sea. Many concrete aspects are still to be resolved. The sides agreed to do that gradually. At current meetings in Moscow, the delegations will work on a draft general political agreement on partnership and cooperation between our countries, feeling that this work could advance quickly. As we've already reported, yesterday from the Northern Space Center, another communication satellite was launched, the Molnya, or Lightning, 1T. This is the 21st space apparatus launched from Plisetsk this year. In the middle of the 60s, when from Plisetsk the first satellites left for space, some soldier wrote on the outside of a satellite which was preparing for launch the name of his favorite girl, Tanya. The launch was successful, and this became a tradition. It was forgotten only once, the 18th of March 1980, and several minutes before the launch, the rocket carrier Vostok blew up, taking 51 human lives. The true reason for the crash is not known even today, but since then, the name Tanya appears on all the craft. It was also written on the communication satellite Molnya 1T, which was launched yesterday from Plisetsk. There would have been nothing unusual in this 1,818th launch if this was not the first launch from the first Russian space center, because previously Plisetsk was called the main testing center and implementation of space means, and only recently the president of the country and the Ministry of Defense confirmed Plisetsk's status as a space center. Now the military space forces of the country expect real financial support from the government. Of course, for us, financing is not a simple question, and we were heard in the State Duma and in the Federative Council. Of course, on separate issues, we didn't find unanimity, but overall, we have found full understanding from the government and our president. Understanding, of course, is good, but real money is necessary. First of all, to begin next year to unfold the automatic launching complex Zenith, which will allow cargoes of more than 20 tons be launched into orbit from the north, and secondly, to provide for the daily lives of the military. After the collapse of the big Aeroflot into 400 small companies, the situation in the Russian skies did not improve, as is known. 48 new airlines did not receive permits from the Department of Air Transportation to operate. 15 were fully closed down. In the majority of cases, the reason for suspension of operations of companies was violations of norms of flight safety, but there are other examples of Russian air companies, for example, the RDS Avia, which not only complies with Russian standards, but even received the right to fly under the emblem of the UN. The air company has a package of orders from Europe and Africa already. The RDS Avia uses N-26 planes primarily for cargo flights. It's planned to purchase passenger planes as well. Aviation is an expensive venture and needs serious investment. Therefore, few air companies can afford to buy new planes. Among these air companies, the company RDS Avia. Of course, RDS Avia hasn't got that kind of money. We're financed by the Russian house Selinga. In the International Air Transportation Association, they feel air corridors over Russia have great significance for the world air industry and predict improvement in Russian aviation by the end of the century. The head of the government of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, from the 21st to the 24th of December, will officially visit India on the invitation of the Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, and Albert Gore, the Vice President of the United States, these days is in Moscow. On the second day of his visit in Moscow, the Vice President of the United States, Albert Gore, spent basically in the Capitol President Hotel. Today, the fourth session of the Russian-American Intergovernmental Commission on Economic and Technological Cooperation opened, which is headed by the Vice President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin. At the session, they're discussing around 20 joint agreements, programs, and projects. One of the main topics of discussion was the interaction of the sides in creating an International Space Station. As is planned, in February of next year, the American shuttle and our station Mir will execute joint maneuvers in space, and in March, an American astronaut will arrive on Mir. Answering our question, how things are, Gore was extremely terse, good, even excellent. In the afternoon, closer to evening, the American Vice President visited Red Square and GUM. What is GUM? As was explained to the guest from abroad by his compatriots who work in Moscow, it's very reminiscent of what is very close to the American hearts today, a mall, an enormous trade center under a roof with many small shops. Before visiting GUM, the meticulous American journalists did manage to ask their vice president a question about Chechnya. The American position in this matter, in this delicate matter, remains unchanged. There were no special comments made. This is an internal affair of Russia. In the evening, the Vice President of the United States briefly met with the Chairman of the Federative Council, Vladimir Shumeyko. In NATO headquarters in Brussels, a meeting of the Defense Planning Committee and the Nuclear Planning Group took place. After an unexpectedly rigid position of Russian leadership expressed in the beginning of December in Brussels and Budapest, the participants of the current session, the ministers of defense of the countries of the North Atlantic Union, evidently tried to smooth over the conflict situation. In any case, this time, and this was emphasized, there was no concrete discussion about candidates for new members of NATO, time limits for entry, which caused anxiety to Russia. And yet, it was announced that internal NATO discussion would continue on developing general terms for accepting new members. The most important topic discussed by the heads of military departments was the interaction of NATO and the UN in Bosnia. New victims among peacekeepers again and again raised the question of the departure from former Yugoslavia. Participants in the meeting were unanimous that this would lead to even greater bloodshed, and the withdrawal of blue helmets should be avoided if possible, but concern for the lives of those who do wear those helmets forces the expedition in developing a safer plan for the withdrawal of peacekeepers. Today, the issue is that such an operation should be conducted under the command and control of NATO, with the participation of the United States as a member of the alliance. The new Prime Minister of Ireland is the 47-year-old farmer John Bruton. Today, the National Parliament, by an overwhelming majority, ratified the appointment of the leader of the centrist party, Fine Gael, as the head of the future coalitional government. In Holland, the third General National Student Demonstration occurred. They're protesting against the government's plans to increase tuition for education. The radically minded participants of the protest blockaded the train terminal in the city, Utrecht, which is at the crossroads of all basic rail routes of the Netherlands. The train movement in the country was interrupted for several hours. In the United States and the state of California, a jet plane of the National Guard crashed. While plummeting, it smashed into a residential home. Both pilots died, and 20 people are injured. Italian scientists who recently studied the Great Pyramids of Egypt insist that they face the threat of destruction. These Great Pyramids of Egypt, known to everyone as the first marvels of the earth and the only which have survived to our days, ancient wisdom says everything fears time, but time fears pyramids. For 4,500 years on Giza Plateau they stand here. Time, sun, sandstorms, nothing could destroy them. The greatest damage, however, was caused by mankind. For hundreds of years, the petrified outer blocks were used for the construction of contemporary homes. Around the pyramids, contemporary roads were paved, and hundreds of buses with tourists' cars daily drive by, poisoning the air with exhaust fumes. Even the Roman Colosseum, which is much younger than the pyramids, cannot endure such an effect. But that's still not everything. Today, the city has approached the pyramids closely, and groundwaters have risen. As a result of intense use of the desert for agricultural use, the climate has begun to change. Rains, which used to fall not every year, now are becoming lengthier and erode the inner blocks of the pyramid, which were made of a softer, sandier substance. According to Italian scientists who studied the top part of the pyramid, Hifren, the second in size, some of the blocks have turned to dust, and this threatens the entire construction. The earthquake of 1992 had its effect as well, so pyramids have to be saved. The changes in the ecological situation as the result of human activity can cause irreversible damage, and we will lose one of the last marvels of the earth. During these moments on the stage of the Bolshoi Theater, there's a premiere, the ballet of Minko's Don Quixote. On the stage of the Bolshoi, one of the favorite Moscow productions, returns Don Quixote. The last moments before the premiere, so responsible for young dancers of the theater. It seems that just recently, Maya Plisetskaya, Katerina Maximova, Mikhail Lavrovsky shone here in this choreographical masterpiece of Marius Petipa and the composer Ludwig Minkus. The composer Minkus, right here in this pit, in this orchestra, in front of this stand, he sat and played the first violin. At that time, he was 69, he composed the Don Quixote. Yes, in this theater, on the same December days, 125 years ago, the work Don Quixote was born. Later, it was produced by Gorsky, but always it remained the hallmark of taste and mastery. During the century, it was performed on many stages of the world, and one of the last productions was in the Danish Royal Ballet, which was produced by Yuri Grigorovich. And today, its new edition. You saw what a success it was. You see what marvelous performers I have. And if the entire country will work like the Bolshoi Theater works, I'll be very pleased. In this majestic production, character dances, dances which breathe life and passion, pantomime, dramatic situations, and pure classic have combined together with the grand pas of the Russian ballet. In the Moscow House of Scientists today, the signing of an agreement was announced between television of the National Geographic Society of the United States and the television company Ostankiно. According to the agreement, the Ostankiно station received the right to air a 95-hour program consisting of documentary films of the National Geographic Society television. Not using the language of the document to replace the beloved series of the underwater odysseys of Jacques Cousteau comes a new, no less interesting documentary program on the life of nature. The debut of the program will be the first day of the new year. On this day, at 4 p.m., instead of the various combat scenes on the screen, the films, The Eternal Adversaries, will be shown, The Lions and Hyenas. The film is not bloodthirsty, but educational. The quality of the film is excellent. This was seen by the reaction of the geographical beau monde at the presentation. And so, for 3 years each Sunday, starting the 1st of January 1995, a scientific educational film about the life of nature provided by the American National Geographic Society to the television company Ostankiно. With this, I bid you farewell. In a moment, Georgi Sarkisyan will continue the program with the sports. All the best.
Счастье мое, радость моя, счастье и радость, русский дом селенка. Еженедельных торгов на фондовых биржах сообщаем курс акций русской недвижимости на сегодня.
Приобрести и продать акции вы можете в агентствах русской недвижимости. Тверь Универсалбанк через сеть своих филиалов и отделений привлекает денежные средства частных лиц и предприятий для размещения в государственные краткосрочные облигации и казначейские обязательства. Вниманию вкладчиков, надежность и доходность по этим видам операций выше, чем среднерыночная. Контактные телефоны. В Твери 39506, в Москве 330-3101.
Мир давно уже оценил преимущество безналичных финансовых расчетов при помощи электронных магнитных карт. Новейшая сеть банкоматов «Гермес Финанс», обеспечивающая любые операции с электронной акцией «Гермес Финанс», охватывает 55 городов России, имеющих свои отделения. Теперь вы можете вести ваши финансовые дела, находясь в командировке, на отдыхе или с помощью ваших близких в других городах России. Это быстро, надежно, удобно. Электронная акция «Гермес Финанс».
Good evening, my friends. Today in Moscow, the World Chess Olympics have come to an end, as you know. After the second last round, the victors were known at that time. The Georgian women chess players were half a point from victory. However, in their match with the Vietnamese team, the Georgian team tied and won the gold medals. The Hungarian team has received the silver, and in third place is the Chinese team. The men's team of Russia finished brilliantly, beating the German team with a score of 3.5 to half a point. The victory of our team, which is headed by Garry Kasparov, was undisputable. In second place is the team of Bosnia-Herzegovina. The bronze went to the youth team of Russia. Our congratulations to all Russians as well who helped to organize the World Chess Olympics in the capital so well. I'll note that today at the General Assembly of the International Chess Federation, re-elected as its president is the Filipino representative Florencio Compromanes. About soccer, the Finnish team, which is the rival of the Russian team in the 8th group, hosted the outsider, the San Marino team. The advantage seemed to belong to the hosts, although after first time they had a minimum advantage of 2-1. However, after the break, Pantorainen played actively and scoring a total of 4 balls. The score is 4-1 for the Finnish team. In the 7th group, on the way to the finals, are the teams of Bulgaria and Germany. You see fragments of the match between Wales and Bulgaria. The guests again reaffirmed their high class. They won with a score of 3-0. 2 balls for the basic defense players Kostadinov and Stoichko.
Я вам сейчас покажу его. Вот он. Ягодин, вернись.
Мы прожили долгую жизнь, и он ушел.
Завтра многие мужчины уйдут из дома. На бирже новая котировка акций «Миф».
Грюндик Мегатрон. Все четче, красочнее, естественнее. Грюндик Мегатрон.
Не видишь? Премьер СВ.
Премьер СВ в каждой семье. Рекламное агентство «Премьер СВ».
Good evening. In the middle of December, the nights never seem to end. The day is shortened further by cloudy weather. And tomorrow as well, according to the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia, on the Kula Peninsula, it will be mostly cloudy skies with some periods of light snow temperatures from -6 to -11. The same weather in the Arkhangelsk district in the Republic of Komi and in the Nenets Autonomous District. However, it's colder there, -15 to 20 degrees. In the northeast of Komi, -30. The weather of the northwest region, the Baltic countries and the Kaliningrad district will be defined by an anticyclone with a center over the Balkan Peninsula. Here, it's partly cloudy without much precipitation. In the end of the day, in the west of the Kaliningrad district and Lithuania, precipitation is expected during the day, -2 to +3. And the central and Volga-Vyatsk regions will be under the influence of a cyclone. Its center is expected over the central Volga. Therefore, it will be cloudy with snow and blizzards during the day, -8 to 13. This same cyclone and the atmospheric fronts connected with it will define the weather in the central Chernozem area, the central and lower Volga, and the northern Caucasus. Here it will be cloudy with isolated periods of snow on the lower Volga and the Krasnodar-Stavropol rim areas, snow mixed with rain. Temperatures in the central Chernozem area and the central Volga, -2 to 7 on the lower Volga, Kalmykia, Stavropol, and Krasnodar rim area, -3 +2. In the republics beyond the Caucasus, it's still cloudy with isolated rain in the mountains with rain. There is a danger of snowslides, which remains. Temperatures on the Black Sea coast of the Caucasus, +10 to 15 degrees. In Georgia, +3 to 8. In Armenia, -3 +2. In Azerbaijan, +11 to 16 degrees. Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova will be under the influence of a Balkan anticyclone. Expected is partly cloudy sky without precipitation during the day, -4 to +1 degrees. In St. Petersburg, tomorrow will be cloudy with a small chance of precipitation. Temperatures during the day, -6 to 8 degrees. In the capital and district, it will remain cold with periods of snow. At night, -14 to -16 throughout the parameters, down to -18. During the day, -12 to 14. That completes our broadcast. All the best. Goodbye.